Hey there, good morning, and welcome to another episode of Bold Business. I'm Carrie Sheffield, filling in for David Grasso, who is out sick. We sent him our love and lost his voice this week. We miss you, David. We are happy to have Bobby Rebell with us again today. Good morning, Bobby. How are you doing?
Good morning, Carrie. Always great to be here, and we do miss you, David.
Yes. And we want to give a shout out to Gen FKD, who helps us put on the show every week. They're a nonprofit dedicated to helping millennials understand money and entrepreneurship. So let's jump right into our first guest today, my dear friend and someone I very respect, Deepak Chopra. He's a mindfulness leader, author, and co-founder of Jio.com. Welcome, Deepak. We're so excited to have you.
Thank you for having me.
So tell us about your. I know, and my new friend Deepak. We were getting to know each other, and I want you to tell everyone more about your leadership course because it's new and it's very exciting.
Well, actually, I've been giving the course at Columbia Business School and also at Kellogg Business School until recently. But then I thought, why not give it online and give it to as many people as possible? You know, we are living in a time right now where I think there's a crisis of leadership internationally. And I thought a distributed leadership in the same way as blockchain could change the world. If you had young millennials like yourselves being leaders in their communities, in their families, locally, politically active, in businesses, we could have a critical mass that could shift.
Blockchain for leadership. Yeah. I love that mental model. That's fascinating.
The blockchain, distributed leadership.
Decentralized. That's how
decentralized leadership. So people create their own communities globally.
Yeah.
And, we start to create a new zeitgeist for leadership that comes from a very deep level. Well, we call it the soul of leadership.
Oh, well, speaking of that, perfect segue. We got a little video. Let's take a look at that about your course.
The soul of leadership. Today, the world is in crisis because leadership is in crisis. In this course, you will go to the highest level, which is your own inner being, and then you harness the power of leadership that makes a difference in the world. I can think of no other course that is so complete and so desperately needed in the corporate world. It's not just about being a good leader, it's about your potential for greatness. And I hope you'll join me.
Wow. Sign me up.
Yes. Well, we're already
free.
And it's free. Tell us how
anyone
people can get
who registers here, I think you have the link.
Yeah.
The course is free for the next 30 days. So the code is JIOFRIEND. And you just have to go to Udemy Soul of Leadership. So
and what's Udemy?
It's the site that helps us.
It's a website.
These online.
Udemy.
They do master classes.
Yeah, super easy to use. Tell us how the course breaks down.
Well, if you can remember the acronym LEADERS, LEADERS. L stands for look and listen, with the eyes, with the heart, with the mind, and with the soul, and create a vision. E stands for emotional and social intelligence. A stands for expanding your awareness into intuition, creativity, higher vision. D stands for doing, action orientation. The next E stands for empowerment. R for responsibility. And S for synchronicity, because every leader I've met over the years, when he or she is really questioned, they say God was on my side, or I was lucky, or I happened to be in the right place at the right time, or there were many coincidences, or it was a state of grace, or I was just lucky. I think there's a mechanism to this. It's called synchronicity. So Carl Jung, the great Swiss psychologist, spoke about it at length last century. I think synchronicity is a very important element in great leadership, extraordinary leadership.
So Deepak,
and that's a spiritual thing.
And so Deepak, you said there's a crisis of leadership globally. What's driving that? Was there a crisis before? I mean, what's the impetus and what's lacking in leadership?
What's principally lacking in leadership is selfishness and greed and power mongering and cronyism and corruption and influence peddling. What is really needed in leadership is service, and what we these days call servant leadership. And so, having given up on my generation, I'm depending
Don't
on your
do that.
generation. On your generation. I think as I go through college campuses, I see a great desire, a great longing for greatness, to go beyond ethnocentrism, racism, bigotry, prejudice, and actually harness the power of what we call team leadership, shared vision, emotional and spiritual connections, complementing each other's strengths. That's what happens in good sports teams. People have a shared vision, they're emotionally and spiritually bonded, and they complement each other's strengths. And there's no one leader that has it all. So this is also referred to as the what do you call it? Not the spider model, but the starfish model of leadership. So, if you kill a spider, you squash the head, it's gone. But if you take a starfish and you cut its limbs, each limb you cut, it grows two more. That would be distributed blockchain leadership for the future.
So what can we each do as individuals to move in this direction?
You can start with a little reflection. What kind of world do I want to live in? What kind of world do I want my children to live in and their children? What kind of leader do I want to be? What do I offer to my team? What do I expect from my team? What do I really want for myself and for the future of humanity? How can we collectively harness our greatness, which is there in every human being? To be born human is a gift.
So Deepak, I'm going to use the word, but what makes bold leadership? What makes a leader bold?
I think more interesting than just being bold and courageous, which is very important, is to really go deep inside your inner being, that place where there are infinite possibilities, where you can harness the power of intention, where you can embrace uncertainty, when you can feel connected to the collective conversation, the zeitgeist of the moment. What we are all longing for right now is a more peaceful, just, sustainable, healthier, and joyful world. And what leaders offer that people really need, which is rare, is integrity, sincerity, responsibility, authenticity, but more importantly, a higher calling. What would you do if you had all the money in the world, all the time in the world? How would you unfold your greatness, and how would that help other people? You have to ask these meaningful questions. What are the peak moments in my life? What is my real purpose? What do I want to contribute? Who are my heroes and heroines in history, mythology, religion? What is a good story, a leadership story? How can I embody that? All great leaders, by the way, have a story, a backstory, a current story, and a future story. And it's all, in the end, all good stories are also love stories. So unless you have these elements of a great story, leadership is ineffective. When people look at a leader, what they're looking for also is hope, trust, stability, and compassion. And they don't actually listen to the contents of a speech. They watch body language, and they resonate with a leader who is at the same emotional frequency as them.
Wow, we're going to keep you in a chair every day, a bold in the corner, and just talk to us, Deepak.
Yes, I feel so much better now about the world, about everything.
Take the course. We were offering.
Well, absolutely.
Yes.
So we've put that promo code. Make sure let's put that code back up. For the leadership, it's JIOFriend. You can get it for free within the next 30 days. We're going to put the code with the link to where you can sign up. We'll put it on our Twitter, our Periscope, our Facebook, and Instagram. This is a $200 value, so we're giving it to you free for our Bold Business viewers. So thank you for being so generous.
Thank you both for having me. Thank you.
All right, so let's get to our next guest. We have Carmine Gallo joining us. Carmine is an executive education instructor at Harvard University and the author of 5 stars, the communication secrets to get from good to great. And he also is someone that I worked with earlier in my career at CNN. So I'm very happy to reconnect with you, Carmine.
Nice.
Many years ago.
Welcome.
It is so nice to be following Deepak because he talked about storytelling, which is part of my new book, 5 Stars. He's absolutely right. Leaders have a great backstory, and it's up to you as a leader to share that story. Plus, I feel so connected to you after Deepak. I feel connected.
It's one big web.
Yes.
We're
We
blockchained leaders here
exactly.
at this table. So tell us, how do you go from good to great?
Well, I wrote 5 Stars because, especially now, in the age of globalization, automation, artificial intelligence, the ability to persuade people, to combine your ideas and your words, to win over hearts and minds is not just a soft skill, which is what I learned in journalism school many years ago. It's not a soft skill. It's actually fundamental to standing out, getting ahead in the workplace and in your career, but more importantly, for becoming that bold, transformative leader who actually ignites people's imagination and stirs souls and isn't just a leader based on title or experience, but somebody who you actually want to follow and you actually want to take that hill with somebody. That requires communication and persuasion.
And what's interesting, though, these days is the communication, to me, depends a lot on the different mediums. So we're talking face-to-face, but we also have social media. We have email. We have texting. We have AI. We have machine learning. We have voice now with different, whether it's Siri or Alexa. So many different ways that we're communicating both with humans and with machines.
Right.
How do you manage that? Are there different ways that you communicate depending on what kind of communication channel you're using? Is the tone different?
Here's the best part. The best part is that we already know how to do it. The formula for great communication and persuasion was handed to us by a really smart guy about 2,000 years ago named Aristotle. The brain, our tools have changed, but the brain hasn't. So the way we process information, the way we communicate, the way the brain likes to absorb information has not changed at all. So when Aristotle said, if I want to persuade another person, if I want to change their hearts and their minds, and if I want to motivate and convince them, I need to have 3 things. I need to have ethos, which is character, credibility. I need to have logos, which is logic. I need to convince you by using a logical argument backed by data and facts. But regardless of social media today, I cannot persuade, and this goes back 2,000 years, I cannot persuade anyone to change their mind if I cannot connect with them emotionally. And that's why the whole idea of storytelling is so important.
Right.
Because stories inform and educate, and that's how we connect with people.
So I have a question for you. What in all your training and education that you do for leaders, as far as gender is concerned, I've heard that as a woman you have to work to project strength, but you automatically project warmth. And it's the reverse for a man, that he has to work to project warmth, but he automatically projects strength. Have you noticed that? What have you seen in terms of what are the secrets for me as a woman versus you as a man in terms of being a good communicator? I
think some of the parallels are often the same. I think in business today, we do an absolutely terrible job of getting information across. We don't connect with people on an emotional level. So whether you're male or female, the stories have to come across. And many of the leaders and the professionals who I interviewed for 5 Stars are female. They're not only do they bring the tech and the science and the data and the information, but they also are great storytellers as well. That combination is absolutely irresistible. So I've got chapters in there about people like Facebook COO Sheryl Sandberg, who is a magnificent storyteller, and she has the data to back it up. Melinda Gates is the same way. In fact, Bill Gates has said of Melinda, she's a better storyteller. She's got the computer science background, but she's a better storyteller than I am. So that data and story, that connection is absolutely irresistible when it comes to leadership.
What's your number one tip for someone that struggles with this, who is a leader despite having challenges with communication and wants to get better?
Start watching. Watch transformative leaders who are great persuaders and great speakers. Beginning in 2006, we now have TED Talks that are streamed online. TED has some of the greatest public speakers of our time. And now you can watch them for 18 minutes at your fingertips. You can go back to 1984 on YouTube and see old presentations of Steve Jobs, who was a magnificent storyteller. So I would start by watching and learning what is it that great speakers do, great persuaders. Best of all, it's at your fingertips for the first time.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. We really appreciate you joining us.
Thank you.
Make sure to check out the book, 5 Stars, From Good to Great.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for joining us, Carmine.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me.
Thanks. Our next guest is Patrick Ambron. He's the CEO of Brand Yourself. We got a quick clip of the company. Let's watch it.
How you look online directly impacts your career. Negative things online can completely ruin your career, and if you don't have a strong, positive online presence, you're missing opportunities. That's why we created brandyourself.com, the only technology that helps you protect, clean up, and improve how you look online. To start, simply type in your name and get an overall reputation score, which is the only score that accurately measures if your online presence is helping or hurting your career. First, our technology scans the entire web and identifies risk factors that could hurt your score and walks you through the process of suppressing unwanted negative Google results, deleting damaging social media posts, and even identifying inappropriate images.
Well, Patrick, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me.
So tell us a little bit about Brand Yourself, and then we're going to talk about, Carrie and I have done some exploring on your site as well, so we're going to get into how we did. But first, tell us how it works.
Sure. So from a high level, Brand Yourself is meant to help individuals clean up, protect, and improve how they look online. So nowadays, when you apply to college, apply for a job, and many other things, your online presence gets scrutinized in a way it never has because of online screening tools. So that means every single social media post you've posted or you've been tagged in, every image, every search result is being, kind of categorized as a red flag or a reinforcing factor. And what we try to do is help consumers navigate that new world.
So let's take a look at how we did. Can we pull up, I think I did some experimenting last night. We can pull up the graphic of how I did. So this is how I did. So what does this took about 5 minutes. It was very easy. And I don't know, we also have another graphic maybe of, I don't know, of the tweets. There were a couple tweets that were considered offensive. And I don't know that these were those offensive. You want to read those? So the first tweet I had done 2 months ago was paying taxes is making you fat and drunk at Moneyish at Katie Hill. So I was literally taking the headline from a Moneyish article that was basically talking about the fact that taxes are really annoying. This was in April, and people start drinking and eating because they are coping with taxes. I don't think that's bad, but you guys flagged it. Yeah, so what you're getting at is, the customer using us is, let's say you might be going for a job interview, you might be starting a business, and what our tool does is it scours the web and it finds things that could be risk factors. Okay. So you can almost imagine it's not a perfect system, right? Especially with a tweet, we don't know all of the context, but you can see, since it was a headline, you might say this is absolutely fine. That's why your score was still very good and you have the chance to say ignore something. But we try to err on the side of safety, right? So had you not been quoting an article and you said, I'm paying taxes and I'm getting fat and drunk, right? Maybe that would be a flag for an employer. So what we do is we kind of surface everything that could potentially be a flag. It's not always completely accurate, but it saves you a lot of time for you to go in rather than read every tweet and every Facebook post and every Instagram thing you've ever posted. This kind of surfaces, here's all the ones that could be risky, and then you could kind of go through and say, this one's actually okay. I was quoting an article. This one, maybe I should think twice about because it could present me in a, not favorable light.
So I didn't put my score up because, I do a lot of political
more complicated
debates.
Than I am.
I got some trolls. I love my trolls. Mwah. Love you all, trolls. I got Twitter trolls. But they sometimes make content about me. Yeah. But I guess here's my question. Because when I went through your tool, from what it seemed like, there was a lot of self-selection bias because it said, here are your top 10 results. Is this good for you? Is this bad for you? Is this good for you? Is this bad for you? So I saw my score steadily go up as I said, well, this is good for me. But I cherry-picked what was good for me. And that made my score bump up. So is this a problem of self-selection?
No, that's also another good question. So there's a few things. And I'll use the employment use case because it's easy to kind of imagine that in other cases as well.
And that's basically the idea that you should know what a potential employer or client would see about you.
Right. So there's a few things. One is, are there any things that would disqualify you from the job? So those are kind of what we were trying to say.
Right.
Tweets that make it seem like maybe you drink too much, or maybe you're too much of a partier, or maybe
so it would flag things like alcohol.
Yes,
exactly.
maybe you have like really aggressive bullying behavior. Those are all things employers see as red flags. The self-selection part you're speaking about is employers also, on a positive side of things, like to see that you're visible, that you have stuff out there that represents you in a good way. So the first place they look is search engines like Google, and that was just, you were reaffirming for us, are these positives, or are they irrelevant, are they negative? So by you selecting them as positive, it's actually giving you a pretty strong indication of how an employer would see it. You're not actually manipulating our score in any way. It's just a way for us to know, are these things actually about you, and are they kind of reinforcing your qualifications?
So then what happens if someone has a disaster? How do you help them? What happens next if you see things that you don't like?
So it depends on the situation. Sometimes it's a matter of, hey, these are old tweets that I thought I was being funny about, but I realize they may not be great, and maybe you can just delete them. No harm, no foul. Other times, though, a lot of our customers are victims of, even think of cyberbullying, or like we deal with a lot of people who have been kind of attacked online by exes, or maybe you fire somebody and they go online and anonymously talk about,
Can you get rid of that kind of thing?
In those cases, a lot of times you can't. So what you want to do is they're front and center when someone searches you. What you want to do is minimize the damage by burying it farther in search engines. So if I look you up, I find out all this other more relevant and positive stuff about you. So if I even find that thing, somewhere on page 2 or 3 of Google, it's having a much smaller impact as if rather than if it was the very first thing and only thing that I found. And the software walks you through the process of doing that if that's the situation that you're in.
So you guys were on Shark Tank. How did you get through that process? Because it's hard to get on there.
And you walked away without a deal, but it was a little bit complicated.
Yeah, so we went on Shark Tank. I believe that aired in 2015, so that was earlier on in the company's journey, and it was kind of an appealing tool just because it's something that more and more everyday individuals and professionals are dealing with. We went on the show. We were offered a $2 million offer from one of the sharks that we ended up turning down. Just because we couldn't agree on valuation of the company. Obviously, that's a really difficult decision to do, especially with the camera on you.
How much were they trying to value it?
They, I believe, if I remember correctly,
you had already raised money at a higher valuation. That's
right, and they were offering $2 million for 25%. And I had offered $2 million, I believe, for about half that, 13%, which is, to be fair, we were in the process of raising a round from investors, and that was a deal we had been able to strike. So I was in a position where it was hard to give someone, twice as good a deal as investors I was currently working with. That would have been a difficult situation. So we tried to negotiate. We couldn't quite get there. It was a very hard decision. Ultimately, I think we made the right one.
And you're still in touch with the shark that offered you the money.
Yeah, once the show ends, it's not as if you're never allowed to speak. And even though we turned down the deal, thankfully, nobody was super upset. Everyone saw it. We were presented in a good way, and didn't burn any bridges in that process. So we were happy about that.
Well, that's impressive because, as they say, you're only as strong as the last thing you turn down. So you're in good shape.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Patrick Ambrin, check it out.
All right, we are excited for our next guest, Shane Snow. So Shane Snow is the co-founder and chief creative officer at Contently, such a cool company, as well as an award-winning journalist. And you also have a new book out, which Carrie's going to tell us about.
Yeah, so your book is called Dream Teams, and on your website, you say, we've got the cover here, but you describe it about pirate gangs, buddy cops, Jewish soccer kids, communist artists, underdog activists, and a guy who tried to build a dome over a small town in Vermont. How did you weave all those together?
Of course.
So the book is about how we can become better collaborators, how everything we do in life at some level boils down to teamwork, whether it's in our communities or our families or our work. And so I did a tour of history of amazing teams that sort of beat impossible odds and then looked at the psychology and new things in neuroscience that explain what are the subtle things that they do that most of us don't do. So, I mean, those stories are, I hate business books, and I just wrote a book that is largely a business book, but I wanted it to read like something that you'd read anyway. So rather than telling the story of some boring company, tell the story of a pirate gang that defeated the odds, and the same lesson that you can apply to a company. And so for me, it's just more fun to write, hopefully more fun to read.
And the forward is by Sheryl Sandberg.
The afterword is by Sheryl Sandberg and Adam Grant. The forward is by one of my favorite people, Aaron Walton, who runs the most interesting ad agency on the planet. They're a multicultural ad agency. They did all the stuff for Lexus and Black Panther, and
nice.
And they did that campaign where all of the where Latinos around the country were wearing T-shirts of things that the president had said, like, I'm a murderer of flavor, and it's a chef or whatever, and there's sort of this really viral campaign. Anyway, so a lot of really cool people were involved in the process of making it.
Well, it's a unique vantage point. What gave you the idea? What inspired you to come up with these very innovative concepts for the book? Because it's a business book, but it definitely is different.
So part of what happened is I saw my role at the company that I started change from...
Which is Contently.
Contently, yeah. Started out as Contently. Contently sounds funner. Everyone started saying that.
So I get a pass for the mispronunciation.
Yes. My role changed from the guy who builds things and makes decisions to the guy who finds other people to build things and make decisions. And then I found myself refereeing sort of disputes and conflicts, and kind of made this observation that the people who we brought in who were the most different from each other had the most conflict but also the most interesting ideas together. So our German head of product and our Korean head of design were like this, but also produced the most amazing stuff. And in my anxiety around how do I lead a team like that and unlock the energy that's there between these different people, I went down this rabbit hole of history. And then, as a science journalist originally, I like to look into the psychology and neuroscience of what explains those kinds of things. So that's how it started. But I also was looking at the world. And so my dad works in nuclear engineering. And I grew up with this storyline of how all these atoms smashing together and all these scientists from Russia and America and New Zealand and wherever came together to help us create this amazing technology. And then you look around and you realize the number one thing that we might do to destroy ourselves is using that same technology. And so found this sort of paradox of different humans coming together who have so much potential, but we also are our own sort of greatest threat. That's what ultimately the book ended up being about. I don't really talk about nuclear war, but that same paradox you see at the big level and at sort of a little startup level, it's the same thing that happens in our own lives, and that's what I wanted to explore.
So because people exist in bubbles, they're silos, and within a company there might be like a production silo, but I think there are also individual silos or blind spots, and this is something I think that's happening in the country right now. I don't want to get political, but as far as it relates to going outside your bubble, how can people do that? Because it seems like people just have their blinders on. They're not willing to even remotely concede an inch, because to do that would be to compromise themselves, and it's very inflamed right now.
Well, that tendency is built into our brains. It's part of how we survived when we were living around campfires in little tiny tribes. But now it's not very useful in this world with the internet and where we live on top of each other, and where we actually need people who are not like us in order to make more progress. So it's a natural tendency, but how do you get around that? I think the first thing is to start thinking of people who are not like you as part of your team. Whether you're working together or not, your critics, your enemies, your intellectual opponents are actually part of your team. That's how historically, even in politics, we had this Hamiltonian idea of two men with different points of view could go in a room together and come up with a third option. It's how we make progress. So if you start to...
Yes.
Exactly. Start to think of that, then it helps you, if you can invite people who are your intellectual opponents into your process, then your ego is less hurt. So that's the first part. But the second part is learning to navigate, how to debate, how to argue, how to sort of harness the cognitive friction between our different points of view without it getting personal, which is kind of the big problem that happens on Facebook and in Congress right now.
It's become so personal.
It's not about pushing the party forward. It's about destroying the other side or being right, and your identity being attached to being right, which that's a hard thing to untangle, but that's a lot of what I end up getting into.
Deepak Chopra would say identity is all a delusion anyway, so just recognize the delusion.
Yeah, well, keeping your identity small, making your identity not part of the equation when you're talking about ideas is very hard, but also very important. It makes it hurt less when you change your mind, and that is actually very psychologically pleasing.
Right. Divorce, ideas, identity, two separate things.
Yep.
Hard to do, though.
I love it.
We'll
Thank
get there.
you, Shane Snow. Thanks so much for joining.
Thanks so much for
having me.
having me.
On your website it says, don't press this button, and I wanted to press it, but I didn't want it to be your little...
I pressed it.
You pressed it. What does it go to?
Your mailing list.
Yeah.
And I signed up,
you
too.
have to sign up when you press
totally
it.
Worked.
You and I are troublemakers.
Genius.
We're like
Genius.
each other, yeah.
I pressed the button.
Thanks for obeying the rules.
Now you outed me. Oh, my goodness. Yes, I'm
All
the
right.
rebel. I pressed the button.
Thanks so much, Shane.
Thank you.
Check out the book, Dream Teams. Appreciate it. Next, we've got joining us here on set, Timothy Henschel. He is the co-founder and CEO of Hotel Planner and Meetings.com. Welcome, Timothy.
Yes.
Hi, thank you for having me on Bold.
And
Are
perfect
you're
time-
based
go
in
ahead.
London?
Yes, I am.
I thought you were going to have a British accent. I'm slightly disappointed.
No,
but
I've been
also
living there
love
for
you.
6 years, but I'm actually originally from Hawaii.
Oh, very nice.
wow.
Hence the travel site.
Yes,
Yes.
exactly. Started
Tell us
Hawaii, started the company in San Diego, California, moved headquarters to West Palm Beach, then opened up a London headquarters for Europe, and then Hong Kong.
So where are we all going on vacation this summer? Where are the best deals?
Well, if you go anywhere that's really hot, like Palm Springs, if you can take that kind of heat, it'll be a scorching deal, of course. Florida, the same place. I would go to the Fountain Blue, hanging by the pool. The pool party is going to be fun, even though it's going to be, in the 40s Celsius, living over in the UK. I'd say about 101 Fahrenheit. But it's going to be a great time because you're going to have a cabana, you're going to have, cocktails served to you, and you jump in the pool if you ever get too hot. So there's where the hot deals are right now.
So are there trends in travel right now that you can spot, that you uniquely can identify, that make certain vacations really worth it, the best value?
Well,
what are you looking for? Is it being just as simple as being off season, going somewhere hot when it's already hot out, as you just said?
We actually get more granular in our data, and so we track trends, track to the Super Bowl down to the best deals of the last minute. Also just did the royal wedding. And what we found is when the hotel rooms start to spike because of the yield management systems that are in our hotels right now, they start to look at their competitive set and then they just one-up each other. Eventually it starts to hit a peak and people start looking for alternative accommodations like Airbnb and HomeAway. So then these revenue management systems don't hit their occupancy levels that they need. So then what happens is they kind of hit the warning button and then it drops out on the market last minute. So you want to sometimes look around big events and then swoop up a last minute deal just because the revenue management systems at the hotels are just not perfect yet.
So what makes what you guys doing different from, because ever since I was in college, I've been obsessed with saving money, and I am an Orbitz. I've been an Orbitz user since 2006. I don't work for Orbitz. I'm getting zero money for this, but I love Orbitz. And every time I would try kayak or anything else, I would always go back to Orbitz. So what makes you different from Orbitz or any of these Airbnb?
We were very different, actually. The technology that I patented 15 years ago with a business partner is based around group travel. So actually, Orbitz is a partner of ours. Many of the large travel sites are partners of ours. A lot of the main corporate travel companies are partners with us for our platform technology that looks for group deals, specifically looking for things between 30 to 70% off if you can bring a multiple number of rooms to the hotel. So it's a very specific niche for looking for small and large groups. Also, meeting space only for meetings.com.
So it's sort of reverse engineering the whole way that we shop for travel. In other words, the companies are sort of bidding for the clients.
Well, there is a
works?
base ERFP is what they call electronic request for proposal model to it. We're moving away from that as an industry. We are now going to instant group rates that are based on negotiate on behalf of the 1.1 million groups we'll have come through the whole platform in general. And then we go to our hotel suppliers and say, look, I've got about 500 groups of this size coming to your city for this year. What's the best discount off of your publicly available rate that you can give us so that I can send it out to all our groups instantly, so it saves you a lot of time, and you're not just negotiating your small group, you're getting the deal on negotiation of the entire market.
So what is the most bizarre group that you've booked in terms of event or travel?
We're very confidential about our partnership.
You don't have to name names.
How about one that
Give us
was
a
been
general
public
sense
about
of
it?
it.
The most bizarre
Yeah.
that's been public about it.
Honestly, I have right now in my head, but I would not
Can
be
you
able to
say
say
it without
but
giving
just
away
imagine,
exactly who it is?
Imagine the more you want privacy, the more you're going to gravitate towards our interface because it allows you to shop anonymously for these group deals, whereas traditionally you would have to call around and then people are going to ask you a lot of questions. So any kind of group you would think that wants privacy is going to gravitate towards us. So I could go through a whole list and it would be very entertaining, but I just can't do that to our customers.
Come on,
No way.
You don't have to name exactly who it is.
It's a TV show. I can't give away a private customer and say this person's bizarre. That would be so rude.
You don't have to name the name,
Okay,
but what's
unique.
the bizarre behavior? What's
Unique.
unique about them without naming the person or group?
I mean, I think we bring people together from all walks of life, and they all have a different kind of way of doing
What's the craziest
things.
request
And
you got from somebody?
the biggest request.
The craziest.
The craziest
Shock
request.
us.
Well, we do a lot of weddings, and then attached to that is stag and hen, bachelor and bachelorette parties. So, we do give each group a regional planner, and they get a lot of unique requests in that market. I'm sure you can imagine. So I like to build up to the imagination, and then I'm not going to necessarily
I got
be
a question.
specific.
Since you're not going to tell us, I'm going to go dark then. How do you prevent human trafficking? And if they're so anonymous, how do you prevent bad behavior being used at these events?
Well, when our planners do, speak with each group, there is a certain amount of qualifications that are done before the transaction actually does occur. So the shopping is anonymous, but when you transact, there will be further qualifications, because there has to be in the group space. A lot of groups travel as micro groups under a big group. So say there was a huge pharma conference. One pharmaceutical company isn't going to want to be in the same hotel with another pharmaceutical company. Mm-hmm. So at the time of transaction, there could be some of that then we move away. And so anything that you were talking about, that of course we would flag, and of course it would be blocked. Because of the nature of our business being very much specific to types of groups, we do have one step further than just an online click a button with a credit card.
All right. I think we're going to let you off the hook now.
It's a happy medium.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for letting us put you through the ringer, Timothy.
She's a tough one.
So next we're excited for our Bookster segment. Bookster is a website for book lovers and much more. I have been waiting for Whitney Johnson to join us. I'm very excited. Let's tell us.
All right. So wait, let me read this part. So welcome, Whitney. Okay. Your book is called Build an A-Team, and it's about developing teamwork and keeping people motivated. And you are a former Financial Grown Up podcast guest, so I'm so excited to see you here. Tell us more about the book.
The book is about how to help you become a great boss, because let me just give you an example. Not too long ago, I had one of my CEO clients call me and say, one of my key people's leaving. I get it. She lives about an hour away from this office. She's got 5 children. She wants to be closer to home. So I get it. But as she sat across the table from me, I had this feeling that she doesn't like working here, and she doesn't like working for me. And I think that's
like a breakup.
Yeah, it's like a breakup. And it's a fear that we all have. We want to be a great boss, but then we worry that we're not. And we mean to be a great place to work, and then we're not. And so, because tomorrow we're going to train people. And so it's basically innovator's dilemma. Whether you innovate or not, there's risk, but with people. And so this book is about how to help you figure out, or how to become a great boss. And the way you do it is by allowing your people to learn. It's that simple.
So are there specific things? What are the big things, high level, that good bosses do?
Well, so one of the things I learned, having been an equity analyst on Wall Street and co-founding an investment firm with Clay Christensen at the Harvard Business School, is that the theory of disruption that we apply to products also applies to people. And we used something called the S-curve. And the S-curve in that context was to help us to figure out how quickly an innovation would be adopted. But I have reimagined it to help us understand learning, the S-curve of learning. And so what does that look like for a boss? Well, a boss understands that every single person on your team is a learning machine. They all want the opportunity to not know how to do something, to figure out how to do it, to master it, and then start over again, to learn, leap, and repeat. And so a great boss will allow you to come in at the low end, at bottom of an S, be inexperienced, not know what you're doing. Then you figure it out. After 6 months, you move into the sweet spot. You give them lots of stretch assignments because they're feeling competent and confident, so you push them even further. And when they get to the top of the curve, they're masters, but because they're no longer learning, they're bored. And so a great boss, once you get to the top of the curve, says, it's time for you to disrupt yourself. It's time for you to do something new. It's time for you to learn, leap, and repeat. And when you allow your people to do that over and over again, to disrupt themselves, then they love coming to work because they know that they're always going to be learning. And that's how you become a boss people want to work for.
So what are the biggest challenges that people face? Because I know if I'm the boss and I have people and they're doing all those things, they get to the top of the S-curve, I don't want to lose them.
That's right.
But what if I still need them to do that same job? What do?
You don't want to lose them. In fact, someone else very famous in history had a similar predicament, George Washington. Alexander Hamilton, he was the top of his learning curve. He came and he said, you know what, I want to go in the military. I think there's a more promising curve over here. And Washington said, so sorry, I can't promote you over other generals. But the real problem for Washington was that he had become his alter ego. He was his go-to guy, and he didn't want to let him go. So as often happens in the workplace, there was a falling out. And eventually, though, Washington was gracious enough to let him move on. And so that's really the danger zone, because for you as the boss, you're like, wait a second, I've invested in this person. They're the go-to. They know exactly what they're doing. I don't want them to go. And yet you know that if you don't let them go, they're either going to leave because they're bored, or they're going to stay and be incredibly complacent. And bored and complacent people don't innovate, they get disrupted. So you got to let them go. And if that's not on your team, then you let them go somewhere else. But this is how you build an A team over the course of your careers, because you have people that say, this person was great to work for. And if you start to get that reputation, people will be clamoring to work for you. And so talent won't be a problem.
I mean, I see that as a reflection when someone goes somewhere amazing. I feel like, wow, we helped train that person to go somewhere amazing.
That's right.
So,
that's right.
I don't want them to go.
Expands.
Yeah,
exactly. And it's so interesting. I remember interviewing Patrick Pichette. He's the former CFO of Google, and he said, I love it when my people get poached. Right?
Yeah.
It takes a great deal of self-confidence, though, to feel that way, because there's a piece of us when they leave that we feel somehow betrayed, like they don't like me, they don't like working for me. But once you've got that self-confidence in place of, okay, we're here to do a job, and I'm actually here to help this person learn when they do get poached, like you just said, Carrie, it's like we helped make this possible, and that's a very exciting place to be.
So how about when there's a gap between what the person thinks their trajectory is on the S-curve and what you think it is?
Ooh, that's
and
a
if
good
there's
question.
a mismatch between maybe you're the expert, you're the boss, you see a skills gap that they don't see.
Yeah.
How can you navigate that to be respectful but also say, look, I think that you need to learn this and this without angering them, and also maybe helping them see, hey, maybe you need to think about things in a different way in terms of what's possible or what is your sweet spot?
Yeah, it's such a great question, and I think that oftentimes happens. We get a little bit excited about what we think we can do. It does. So I think the way you mitigate that is at the very beginning, when they start working for you, is to have a conversation with them and say, okay, so here's the S-curve of learning framework. We know or expect that you're going to be at this low end for 6 months to a year, and here are the skills that I see you as having. Here are the skills that you have, and very early on, or you believe you have, very early on, I'm going to give you a lot of very assignments full of constraints, very tightly scoped assignments, so that we can figure out and test what it is you actually know how to do. And then we're going to get feedback. And that feedback is going to help you know what you know how to do, help me know what you know how to do. Make sure you're actually in the right job, because we know that sometimes people lead with what they do well, not with what they do best. And so you've got to iterate. But if you can do those tightly scoped assignments, then the two of you can kind of get into sync. It's like with jazz. I don't know if you've ever looked at jazz, but when you start with jazz, the very first run through is you're all doing the melody, and then after that you start to riff. And I think with new employees, if you can start with the melody, tightly scoped assignments, see what they know, let them see what they know, then you over time won't have that problem of a mismatch of expectations.
Well, as a fellow BYU grad, and you're a musician too.
Yes.
I'm a musician, I'm classically trained, and I gave an interview to a magazine that said a startup is jazz, and I'm classically trained. I had to disrupt how I think about music, because all I wanted to do was be very rigid about it.
That's right.
And it's jazz.
Yeah, that's right. It is jazz.
Yeah.
It is jazz.
Yeah.
You start with your header, you get in sync, but then after that, you got to improvise.
The classical rule book goes out the window. So.
Yep.
Thank you so much for joining us, Whitney
This was
Johnson.
great. Thank you.
Thank you.
The book is great.
Our next guest is Marion J. Riggs. He's the founder of Loving Mind Institute. Marion works with those struggling with addiction, and wow, that is such an important topic right now, Bobby, with what's happening with the opioid crisis.
Absolutely.
So welcome to the show. Tell us more about your work.
Yeah,
so I'm excited to be here, and it's a very important topic. So I'd like to discuss how I got involved in this cause, and this cause actually goes way back to when I was 17. So, and then it's been a long journey ever since. And so there's been periods where, overall, I'd like to discuss about the trouble with the treatment industry, the past historical failures. So as I was saying, when I was 17 years old, I was in a treatment program called Straight Incorporated. And this treatment center did their best at that time.
Can you tell us more about what was a little bit background?
Sure. So
what got you there?
Yeah. So that's the striking thing. Is what got me there was not much. So this is one of the problems with the treatment industry, is that something like Straight Incorporated. It's not the only one back in the 90s. So it started in 73 and it closed down. Last was 93. Last time that Straight treated somebody was in 1993. So I was in there in 1991 at 17. And so I smoked pot, and I smoked a little bit of pot, but my family was a Jerry Falwell, Reagan-loving family, and they said, "Oh my God, my son's he's going to die," and so they put me in Straight. But the problem with treatment programs like Straight adolescent treatment centers is that they can't run well on the extremes. They have to go to the center, and people that necessarily don't have addiction we're put in these places. And so anyway, so that's how I got tied to this cause. And so it's a long...
Wait, I'm sorry, you said people who aren't addicted are put into the treatment centers?
Yes, all the time. All the time.
So in your case, it was just your parents' judgment that they felt you needed the treatment?
That's right. And so unfortunately, I can't cover all of that today. Right. But that starts with how this journey began for me. Mm-hmm. And what being in my eyes, being aware. Well, I'll never claim to be an expert in addiction, and anybody that claims to be an expert in addiction, I would really question them, because we just have to accept as a society that we really don't know what we're doing.
Tell us about your work now.
Yes, and so, but what made me aware, what being in there made me aware, is all the ways that we're getting things wrong now, and in many ways that we're getting things wrong. So, so I overcame addiction in my late 20s. So being in a place like Straight, they'll stigmatize you, label you, and do a lot of things that you carry on with you when you leave there. So I overcame addiction and then went on and then changed my course of life, so which is a big success story. And from there, I entered grad school, got a PhD, and now I'm doing a postdoctoral fellowship at Harvard Medical School. So yes, it's a lot to try to get into.
What exactly is the Loving Mind Institute?
Yes, so Loving Mind Institute. Loving Mind Institute is the mission of Loving Mind Institute is advanced biomedical research and scientific initiatives for mental illness and addiction. And so my heart goes out to those with addiction because I'm tied to the cause. I understand addiction, what it's like to be imprisoned by addiction, and then to overcome it. But in our view, we see addiction as a biopsychosocial disease. And so, and our center is the biological aspects of it, and how can we address the biological aspects of it, and as well as mental illness. So,
that's interesting though, because what you just said was very complicated. How when you're looking at the biological aspect of it, are you divorcing it from the bigger complex of where someone exists, their community, their family, their workplace, their place of worship? I mean, have we compartmentalized things, and is that part of the problem why we're not effective about treating addiction? So
I don't think we're addressing the biological aspects of it very well. So we know that my community speak is going to be strongest in addiction because I've been there, and my heart goes out to those with mental illness, and I identify with them as well. So I'm just as passionate about supporting research for mental illness as well. And the lab I'm in actually studies mental illness and is making great progress using patient-based approaches like stem cells. And that's how I got into nonprofit work, was through stem cell advocacy. So I'm a huge grassroots advocate for stem cell biology and how we can use this to understand the various factors of mental illness. I would like to see what we're doing in the lab for mental illness also done for addiction, and we aren't doing it for addiction. The problem with doing work on just mice is that you cure a mouse, but doesn't translate to the humans.
It's such a different context. I think that because it seems like right now our criminal justice system treats addiction more as a crime as opposed to mental illness. So do you work with our prison systems and our incarceration systems to?
Well, I've gone out and spoke to those in those places. But what LMI is focused on is how do we get science behind us? How do we get evidence-based practices behind us? How do we what we haven't done, we talk about the social aspects and environmental aspects, that's neutralizing, if you want to use a disease, the illness or disorder, however you want to frame it, biopsychosocial, however you want to say it, you're neutralizing the condition, right? So when somebody has diabetes or cardiac failure, they don't have the issues, it's not really an environmental issue of stigma or lack of social connection or family relationships or whatever it might be, or trauma or whatever might be going on with that. You're neutralizing the condition at that point. You're putting them on par to get help, right? So things like tough love or, what was very, I think, traumatic for many people in straight, treatment through trauma, which was their goal. Right. But, it was told to us that we need to break you down because you don't know what a bottom is.
So now, what is the philosophy now?
Where I'm heading with that is that you don't go through those things with other diseases like stigma. So you got to get people at least on par. But once you do that, you're still dealing with somebody who's in a vicious cycle of addiction, and it's a biological basis for that. If there's a role to get someone to stop the vicious cycle sooner. Why take years and decades? Every person who's abused or has addictive illness or has been a person with addiction will tell you they used for many months, years, when they no longer wanted to. They no longer wanted to. So it isn't about that they didn't want help. The biggest myth out there is that, if they would, somebody can't get help until they want help. People wanted help for a long time, but they didn't know what to do.
Yeah. Well, we thank you so much for your work, Marian Riggs. Appreciate it.
Really wonderful.
Yes, make sure to check out the Loving Mind Institute.
Yep.
All right. Our last segment is brought to you by Engineered Tax Services, where engineering and accounting come together. Joining us on Skype is John Loudon from ETS. Welcome, John.
Hey, glad to be with you.
So recently, President Trump has made headlines with his tariffs on Canada and Mexico. So, John, tell us more about this.
Well, I think the first thing everybody should understand is nobody wants tariffs as the end goal. Tariffs are a negotiating tool. The president, we know about businessman Trump, he likes to surround himself, the guy who put the Apprentice show together. He likes to find the best talent, surround himself with great people, and he's got top economic advisors, and this is the strategy that they're taking.
So that is a new approach to American foreign policy, and I think it's something interesting because it's certainly something that China has done for a long time in terms of how they put the thumb on the scale to take intellectual property from any American or any other foreigner trying to do business. They strip them of their intellectual property if they want to do business in China. So it's certainly something, that's basically a de facto tariff. It's something they've been doing for 50 years. So the president is certainly changing the math. But at the same time, I'm a former Moody's analyst, and Moody's came out with a report saying we anticipate that these tariffs will have a net negative effect on the economy. Mm-hmm.
I believe that. I believe they will probably have a net negative effect if they remain in place or they escalate into a trade war. But I talked to a friend back during the campaign before when the president was still in his primary, and all he does is hotel deals in L.A. That's his business. He's an attorney doing hotel deals. And he said to me, President Trump, because this was before he was president, he said he'd done a number of deals with Trump. He said Trump wins every time. And he said one of the keys to Trump's winning is you never know in a negotiation exactly what he wants. He's got an end game. He's playing chess, and everybody else is playing checkers. So you have to bear in mind, again, that these tariffs are not the end game. If they're left to stand, that's a problem. But also consider that the tariffs are having all kinds of net positives. I'm originally from St. Louis, Missouri. Lost our background there. Originally from St. Louis, Missouri. Across the river from St. Louis is Granite City, Illinois. The once proud steelworkers were all out of work there. They shut down the plant during the Obama administration before we protected American jobs. Now that steel mill is up and running. It's not at full capacity, but it's up and running. About 500 families have a totally better life. And all the businesses in Granite City, Illinois are doing awesome again.
So John, I know that Peter Navarro wrote an op-ed for USA Today. The headline was, Donald Trump's steel aluminum tariffs lift low and moderate income families. And he highlighted similar, I think he was looking in Kentucky, some rural areas that have been decimated by the decline of steel and aluminum. But I guess here's my question is, isn't that kind of being retro or looking back in the economy? Because it seems like our country is moving away from manufacturing and more toward high tech and things that are more about information and innovation rather than manufacturing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that is certainly a valid argument, although I would disagree with that argument. I mean, the question assumes that you can really be an economy with less diversity. The thinkers and the ivory towers will come out with all kinds of new theories. But at the end of the day, can you be a country that's 100% intellectual and has zero manufacturing? I mean, nobody wants that. So I think when you try to justify migration as something somehow natural and should just be left alone, you can pencil out the theory and it sounds great behind in the offices and the institutions of higher learning, but they don't necessarily wash out when you contemplate what happens when there's a war and suddenly we can't ramp up and start making the armaments that we need to make, or the planes we need to make, for instance. So the president is calling the steel tariff a national security issue because he does want to have a robust steel industry in this country, and I think there's validity to that.
That's interesting. Where do you see this evolving, though, beyond steel? What do you think, what other industries do you think should be paying the most attention to this? And back to your analogy about chess versus checkers, I mean, where do you think, if you could get inside President Trump's head, I mean, where do you think he sees this ending beyond the steel issue?
I love that question. How to get inside the president's head. I don't know that I have the capacity to figure out the moves of the master deal maker. But I can tell you one thing that I believe he's done. He took China, and he's looking at North Korea, and he's looking at China. The intellectual property theft in China is horrendous. It's a huge problem. And the trade deficit's a problem. But he went to China and said, okay, we need to change these things. We need to renegotiate. But by the way, I need help with North Korea. North Korea, you guys have all the leverage over North Korea. They won't do anything without China. So China called the little dictator up. We saw the famous train going out of North Korea up to China. The train went home, and suddenly the dictator is singing a different tune. I think the president squeezed China on trade, threatened trade, and said, for now, let's deal with North Korea, and we'll get back to trade later. So I think the president, everything that he's putting out there, I think the trade deal with Mexico, tariffs on Mexico and Canada, probably as much as anything have to do with having Mexico help fund the wall. It's really hard to see exactly what he's angling for, but I know this, that he's angling with great deliberation and strategy. And he's not, people underestimate him all the time. Oh, he's crazy. I'm at a conference right now, a financial conference right now, and there are a couple people left and center that said, this genius picking fights with our friends. Friends don't pick fights with friends. He's got a strategy. He's got an end game, and people underestimate him to their own peril.
Well, that certainly happened in 2016.
Yes.
So
he's been underestimated.
We will see what happens, and we will check in again with you. Thank you, John Loudon from Engineered Tax Services.
Okay, thank you.
And thank you all for joining us here on Bold Business. Don't forget to join us again next week, Tuesday, 9 a.m. for another guest lineup. And also this Friday, me and Clay Aiken, we're going to be back at 10 a.m. Eastern Time on Bold TV, as well as a whole new episode Friday at 12 noon. We will see you there.
Have a great week.